Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. London editor Nico Heinz is with us for this edition. Welcome back as well to German television producer Ulrike Koltermann. Catherine Field, Europe correspondent for New Zealand Media, and Victor Mallet, Paris bureau chief for the Financial Times. We were talking about allies of D-Day, a bit at cross purposes for this 75th anniversary. Russia, you'll recall, was invited to the 70th anniversary of D-Day to the Normandy beaches, partly because there was also a sideline summit on Ukraine at the time during the height of the crisis there. This time around, the Kremlin suggesting that this whole D-Day Atlantic Alliance thing is a non-event.
According to historians, the Normandy landing did not fundamentally influence the outcome of World War II. This was predetermined as a result of Red Army victories, mostly in Stalingrad and Kursk.
Does Maria Zakharova have a point, Catherine Field?
She does have a point. And by not inviting Vladimir Putin, they have really fed into the paranoia, the hatred and the distrust in Russia that they haven't been really fully appreciated in the writing of the history of the Second World War. 27 million Russians died in the Second World War, and Russia is always saying, you're not taking this seriously. We made a big contribution. It was an enormous sacrifice. Some of the battles in the Eastern Front were enormous. She has a point. And it really wouldn't have made all that much difference to the setting of the table placements and things if the French had invited Putin.
I think it would have been a good idea to invite a little bit larger, invite Putin and also invite Merkel, because it was the last time that we had veterans around. They say they invite them on the 70s and maybe on the 80s, but why?
And they invited them for the armistice.
Yeah, and she definitely had a point. There was actually an opinion poll about the Russian participation of liberating Europe, and just after the World War, it was the perception that of the role of Russia was much bigger than today. So this is totally shifted, and I think it would have been important to show all sides. Now it looked like an American-French summit, more or less, with Trump and Macron playing their roles, but it would have been better to invite more leaders.
Yeah, and
the only thing was, I mean, it was the anniversary of D-Day, which was the landings in Normandy, and the Russians were not part of that. So, in that sense, it's not particularly.
Yeah, which is contrived, inviting him to the 70th or not inviting him to the 70th.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't know whether they would have accepted, but it is worth remembering. This is not like the end of the war in Europe, for example, where it would be very odd not to invite the Russians.
All right, better than a Normandy landing, a boat ride with Vlad, Russia's president, showing his Chinese counterpart the sights of his native St. Petersburg. Xi Jinping on a 3-day visit to Russia. They attended the big economic forum, Victor Mallet, that they go to every year. Also, Huawei inking a deal with Russia's largest telecoms operator to build 5G networks for the Russians.
Yeah, I mean, these are two of the big authoritarian powers in the world. I think it's worth pointing out that China is very much the senior partner now, with an economy about 8 times the size of Russia's, which wasn't the case, of course, 30 or 40 years ago. So we have a complete sort of power shift there. But yeah, these two countries obviously have common interests, in particular in countering the sort of Western narrative of democracy, freedom, and.
But this boat ride also an illustration, you might say, again, of that world order that's kind of in flux, where old allies talk at each other at cross purposes. And I don't know how much of a new alliance it is, because Russia and China have also had their issues in the past.
They have, and I think they'll continue to do so. But China's very keen on getting access to energy imports from Russia. Gas in particular, oil and gas. So, they have a sort of interdependence. And I think a lot of people, they do have a lot of mutual suspicion based on the past. But I think the kind of relationship has developed beyond what people expected into a closer relationship and a more important one. And I think that's partly because of, the way the US has started sort of turning away from its international alliances with the rest of the world.
All right, so there's the 75th anniversary of D-Day. One event that definitely was not commemorated this week in China, was the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. It ended a student uprising of more than 5 weeks. It also spelled doom for the reformist wing of the Communist Party back in 1989 and set China on its current political course. At a regional summit in Singapore last weekend, China's defense secretary, unabashed.
Do you think the government was wrong with the handling of June 4th? There was a conclusion to that incident. It was political turmoil the central government needed to quell. The government was decisive in stopping the turbulence. That was the correct policy.
There's a saying in China, no politician wants to be known as the Chinese Gorbachev.
Indeed. Well, they've gone all out. The Chinese Communist Party got back in the saddle. They're running the show. Xi is very much in charge of the whole show. So they have to keep the same narrative on Tiananmen as they've always had. It was chaos. It was chaos that was instituted by rogues who are students at the university who were fed all sorts of misinformation from foreign agents. So they've got to keep the lid on it. It's unfortunate because when we look at what's happening in China, it's no different, if not it's worse today than it was in Tiananmen when you look at who's being the controls on freedom of speech, academic freedom, on who can come, who can go. Nothing has changed. If anything, it's wrong. And it's very interesting that we just saw those pictures of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. These are two men that operate very strictly controlled societies. It's not just here and a bit of internet censorship here and there. It is very controlled.
Nico Hines, 30 years ago, we all thought the French president at the time said a regime that shoots on its own youth is doomed to failure. François Mitterrand was very wrong because it's been 30 years and China's gone from strength to strength. Nonetheless, when you hear Catherine Field talk about how there's a tightening of the screws in such important fields as academia, does that make China a giant with a feet of clay?
Potentially, although if you look at the kind of global economic trends over that 30-year period, I don't think feet of clay really sums it up. I mean, it's been a success story, no matter what you think of it morally, ethically. And I think, this week, the fact that Putin and Xi are meeting, I don't think there's any doubt that was the more important summit of the week. And Xi saying that Putin is his best friend, and Putin saying, let's end the hegemony of the US dollar in world currency. I mean, okay, that might be a bit of a pipe dream, but I think, it shows the ambition that these countries have. And I don't think that we should take it for granted that they won't be able to achieve that. Russia and China pursuing kind of tougher and stricter regimes. And of course, what we've seen in other parts of the world, like in Sudan, are also reminiscent, obviously, of Tiananmen. But what they do in China now is so much more sophisticated. They've got a much tighter control than they had over those students in the 80s, but they just do it in much more sophisticated, cunning, clever ways, and more wicked ways in many ways. I mean, if you look at what's happening with the Uyghurs. So I don't think feet of clay sums it up. I'd be very concerned about them.
Where Tiananmen was commemorated on Tuesday was Hong Kong, where 120,000 turned out for a candlelight vigil. Hong Kong, where there are newfound fears that civil liberties are to be further quashed. When you look at those images, Victor Mallet, what's your reaction?
Well, interesting. This was one of the largest Tiananmen celebrations or commemorations that we've seen in Hong Kong for many, many years. I think in some people say it's the largest ever. And what it shows is that while censorship and economic success has essentially kept the youth of mainland China very quiet, in places like Hong Kong, that is not the case at all, because Hong Kong has not had censorship until now, and the Hong Kong people are extremely nervous that Chinese authoritarianism is already beginning to crush Hong Kong's supposed autonomy, which is meant to last until 2047, and obviously isn't going to do so because it's already being withdrawn. We've seen cases of university professors put in jail essentially for their political views. There's an extradition law coming which will allow China to extradite people that it doesn't like, and we've had the first cases of Hong Kongers granted refugee status in Germany to Hong Kong political activists, freedom activists, democracy activists who are now living in Germany because they essentially need to be protected from Hong Kong's system. This is a very worrying development for the people of Hong Kong.
I think what's important when we see these pictures from Hong Kong is these commemorations don't just happen every 10 years. It's every single year in Hong Kong, in Victoria Park and Causeway Bay. They come out. They have not forgotten, despite what the Chinese Communist Party tries to do to shut all this down. They haven't forgotten. And picking up on what Nico was saying from London, it's how the West reacts to it. Well, I could not imagine anyone standing up against the Chinese Communist Party at the moment. We've allowed them into the WTO. We've brought them into all sorts of international agreements. And thinking back again to 1989, here in Paris, the Bastille Day parade, they had the goddess of democracy leading the parade down the Champs-Élysées. And it should have been France's year for the parade. It was the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution. I can't imagine that happening in a Western country, that there'd be so much said about democracy in China.
Lots of reactions on the hashtag World this week, including this one. Sudan's the new Tiananmen Square. Please, world, join and watch this. They want democracy. Nico Hines was talking about it. Will June 3rd be remembered as Sudan's Tiananmen? Leaders of the junta there returning from regional summits in the Gulf and cracking down on the peaceful sit-in outside army headquarters in Khartoum. At least 113 killed among those pressing for a transition to civilian rule after they forced out longtime strongman Omar al-Bashir. Now here you're seeing images of Ethiopia's reformist leader, Abiy Ahmed, who's come in to mediate and to speak to both sides. Ulrike Kolterman, first of all, will this week be remembered as Sudan's Tiananmen? The students haven't said their last word, neither have the opposition leaders.
I think it's still ongoing, and the international community is not paying that much attention to it because there's so much other news, and it's Khartoum and it's going on forever. But there's something really serious happening, because what happened in Darfur years ago, in 2003, there was a genocide going on, and these are actually the same people. What was happening in Darfur is now happening in Khartoum, and the guy is still the same. And
the leader of what was then known as the Janjaweed militia,
Mr. Dagalo, he is still in power, and he's got the support of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, because he sent militia to fight in Yemen. So it's not only a local fight between different factions. There is something really serious happening there.
Victor Mallet?
Well, we're seeing a reflection here of some of the geopolitical trends we've been talking about. The United States is not going to stand up for democracy in the way that it used to in a place like Sudan, because it doesn't care that much, and this is very unfortunate. And China and Russia, whose leaders we saw together, are actually going to actively work against it.
Yeah, they vetoed a resolution.
Exactly, they vetoed a resolution in the UN condemning the military crackdown, the military killings in Sudan, and in a way, this shows you the way the geopolitics is moving in essentially a very negative direction if you believe in democracy and freedom.
That junta in Khartoum, though, it's not monolithic as such.
No, I mean, that's the problem of Sudan. Bashir stayed in power for 3 decades because he used to play off the different factions, and that's the whole problem in Sudan. And as the international community doesn't pay much attention, it's going on and on and on. And now a very brutal militia is back in power. And if you look at the methods, I mean, the people are not only killed; they found the bodies in the River Nile, and these are exactly the same methods that they used in Darfur.
Yeah, and the use of rape as a weapon of war. Before we go, it's becomes something of a tradition in this country. The French president visits the national football team before a World Cup, which we then go on to win. Last June, Emmanuel Macron brought the men luck. So how about the women? Les Bleues, with an ES if you're spelling it the French way, kick off this Friday at home at the Parc des Princes against South Korea. And yes, we're kind of feeling football fever in this country. 70% of tickets already sold for the tournament. Decent TV ratings for the warm-up matches, and genuine interest. So the question is, well, first of all, Nico Hines, will you be watching the Women's World Cup?
Absolutely, I can't wait. And I think you can't really gauge the interest now. Yes, people are kind of trying to pay a bit of attention, but I tell you what, if France get through and start winning some knockout games, get to the quarterfinals, the semi-finals, then I think everyone's going to get excited, and it'll be the same here. England did surprisingly well at the last World Cup 4 years ago, and by the end, the whole nation was watching, even though it was in the US and it was bad TV viewing times for us. So no, I think it's going to be huge, and it's noticeably different here now. Advertisers are always a key indicator for me, and the posters around, on the buses and the tubes around here are full of pictures of these female athletes that we're about to see.
All right, so have women broken football's glass ceiling? Not quite yet, if you listen to England and Lyon defender Lucy Bronze.
Younger, definitely, and it is a different game when you compare the route to the top in the men's game and the women's game. It is harder. The boys, they get to play 5 times a week for their academies. It's all paid for. They get their education on top of it, and they do that from the age of 6 till they're 20, till they become a professional. Whereas you look at the girls' game, and they'll be lucky to train twice a week.
Still a ways to go.
It's a long way to go, and it was very interesting that the Norwegian player, she's not coming to the tournament because of this issue of women not being paid the same as men. And it's just appalling. I was just thinking it's so last century when we're talking about women athletes not getting the same as men. It's even more bizarre. We're talking about football, tennis, all these sports that women, they're not even getting 50% of what men are paid. So, yeah, it's a real shame. But it's good to see that there's so much excitement. On my way here tonight, there were people out on the streets getting ready for the match. I think it's a real shame that the first match isn't at the Stade de France. It should be at the National Stadium. And I also think the final should also be at the National Stadium. It shouldn't be down in Lyon. This is a tournament that France is hosting, and they can fill that Stade de France.
Now, there's a good reason why it's in France's second city, Lyon, which is that Lyon is sort of this maverick club where you do have parity, gender parity, with the football academies, where you have this tradition of boosting the women's side. I think they're European champions for I don't know how many years in a row. Do you agree with Catherine that the final should be in Paris?
Well, I think Lyon is a good place, and it's definitely true that this is not only about football, it's about gender equity. Everyone is talking about it. And there's another big question, because if the US team will win again and keep the title, will Donald Trump come and see the final? We don't know.
I have a personal interest in it. I hope it's in Paris because I live here and I want to watch the matches with my daughter, who's a keen football player and plays for her university team. So let's hope so. But I mean, I suppose I should go to Lyon. We should go to Lyon to watch it.
Lyon and other points. One more point on this, Nico Hines. When you look at powerhouse Lyon's run, you were telling me before the show that women's football has come such a long way that its rank as the undisputed champion of Europe could soon be under pressure?
Well, there's something interesting happening in the game over here, which is that the big boys are starting to take it seriously. For years and years, there was a team called the Doncaster Belles, were the biggest team in women's football. And over recent years, teams like Arsenal have been leading the way. But now, the really big teams, Manchester City and Manchester United, have started to take it seriously. And Manchester United actually had their very first ever season in the second tier this year, and they won 18 of the 20 games. They scored 98 goals and conceded 7. They were just smashing everybody out of sight because they had all this new money. And I think, make no mistake, these big Premier League brands are now coming for women's football, and they will help to propel it further forward as the kind of glory hunters get on the bandwagon. And I would say teams like Lyon need to watch out.
All right. The warning comes to us from London. Let the games begin. Nico Hines, many thanks for joining us. I want to thank Catherine Field, Victor Mallet, Ulrika Kolterman. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. All right, we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
Catherine had quite a few grievances there about the World Cup. Why isn't the final in Paris? How come they're not paid enough?
Well, yes, and it's a question that a lot of people are asking, especially about the money. And you would think that in a post-Me Too era, maybe we'd be looking at the Women's Football World Cup a little differently this time around. I found it interesting when I spotted this cartoon online. It was done by Mike Thompson. You play like a girl, says the banner, and one of the gentlemen in the crowd says, remember when that was an insult? Now, the interesting thing about this cartoon is it was done in 1999. It was done for the very first Women's World Cup, and I'm really not sure that we've come all that far since then, to be honest. It's sort of give with one hand, take with the other. L'Équipe seems to be taking it quite seriously. They have this headline, can we do it again? Hoping that the women's team can echo, of course, what we saw the men pull off, and we could be the double champions of the world. Doesn't seem too likely to happen if you...
Yeah, the Germans beat us last time. By the way.
Yes, absolutely.
Good again.
But it is interesting to see that L'Équipe also has this as its magazine cover tomorrow.
Right.
This is Wanda Nara, dubbed the Atomic Blonde, and she's an agent who is apparently shaking up Italian football and, of course, has to be posing with her boob half out in a pair of leather trousers. I'm not quite sure why they felt it necessary to do that, but it does feel a little bit gratuitous, like they just thought, oh, let's go with the glamorous blonde, because maybe we don't find the female footballers attractive.
So hang on, this is not a football player, this is an agent.
Yes.
Okay.
Which they're featuring as the Women's World Cup kicks off. It does seem a little bit to me like, let's please the men reading L'Équipe and stick a blonde with large bosoms on the cover. Le Parisien goes with a more positive headline, although it is the words of a former player rather than the editorial team. Women's football is more than just isn't just a subcategory, says Melissa Plaza. And there are quite a few things out there at the moment that do seem to be trying to tackle sexism head-on when it comes to football. One of England's sponsors has actually created a video that is a reworking of Three Lions, which is the big fan favourite, the song. Unfortunately, they haven't done the whole song. They've done the rather boring, wordy bit at the beginning. But some of it's pretty nice. Take a look at this video.
So many sneers, all those well done girls. Wear you down through the years. But we still see that tackle by Moore. And when Nikita scored, Seffi belting the ball and Nobsy dancing. Football's coming home.
I'm not sure that football's going to be coming home because England aren't big favourites either. I think the best message about sexism and how we really shouldn't have it comes from the German team, who produced a video, an advert that has gone viral. And its tagline is, we don't have balls, but we know how to use them. And it's a great video. It talks about how they've battled sexism from the minute that they started competing, that people think they're not good enough, that they're not fast enough. They simply don't even know their names. They don't know that they've won the European Championship 8 times. It's a great video, well worth taking a look at. Millions of people have watched it already, I have to say. Interestingly, the German men's team have got in on the act, creating their own little video. I'm not sure this is quite as woke as they thought it was, though, because it appears to be the men's team making breakfast. And the implication to me is that if the women weren't occupied with the World Cup, then it would be them at the helm cooking breakfast. So I'm not quite sure what they're trying to say with this video, I have to say.
Is that how you interpret it, Ulrika?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right.
And it's not the first time that the Germans have got it a little bit wrong, may I say. Back in 2011, very different message from the German women's team. This is them posing for Playboy, which I must admit, I was quite shocked at. You get enough sexism as it is if you are a female footballer to pose in that way. One of the things that they say in that advert that everyone loves is they're talking about the fact that, yes, women can wear heels, they can dress up and be sexy, but that doesn't make us any less serious when we're on the pitch.
Right. Well, you know, here in France, there's the local rugby team which sells a lot of calendars of men who
Well, I don't know what
in their
you're
birthday
talking about.
suits.
I've never bought one of those calendars.
Right.
Okay, I do have a few, I'll be honest. Lots of typical remarks that we're seeing online like this one, people saying, why do we have to label them as Australia women, Brazil women? We all know it's the Women's World Cup. This guy, very typical, no sexism or machoism intended. Women's football is plain boring. But I think the worst thing that I've seen actually comes from a British media outlet, which will remain nameless. This is the worst thing I have seen. They are talking about introducing Scotland's World Cup team, and they say who's the sassiest, who's the doziest, who likes to look all stunning on Instagram, and who's prone to some sexy singing on the team bus. Can you imagine them saying the same thing about the men's Scottish squad? It would never happen.
Indeed. Many thanks for that, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.